Well, good morning. Good morning. How are we doing this morning? Glad you're here and glad you made it. And honestly, I love it that we have a church. Like, there's a lot of places if you go to a church and you do the greeting time, it's like the most awkward moment of your life. I love it that here it's like actually something that like people take part of. So thanks for greeting each other and hanging out. This is actually an important part of what we do. And this morning we're gonna talk a little about the tribe and just being together and what that means for us, how we can learn from Jesus and his disciples, the time they spent together, and how important that time really is, and the things we can learn from what they experienced in their time together. Yesterday, I had a chance to, again, thank you to everybody who did Second Saturday Serve and was here as a part of that for foster family care packages. That's a hugely important thing for what we believe in here at Restoration. We are a big part, like a lot of what we do is focused around trafficking. But one of the things we found out around human trafficking is that the gaps in the foster system are what creates so much trafficking in our area. And so we were like, we need to get involved with fostering. So doing what we're doing right now, thank you guys for being a part of that. That's a huge thing in being a part of foster family lives. Yesterday, I didn't get to be there because my wife, she went to a women's retreat earlier this year that the church did. And I don't know what happens at these because I'm not allowed to go to them. I'm not sure I approve of all of it because my wife came home from the women's retreat and she said, Kevin, I was talking to some of the ladies, and you know, one of the things I've realized in my life is I've never won a medal. I'd like to win a medal for something. And I was thinking, like, in my mind, I was thinking, well, okay, there's probably a lot of ways to get a medal. I don't know, we could buy one. Would be cool. Like those ones that they give you for like soccer at the Y can't be that expensive. I could get you one of those out of a soccer ball. And she goes, so I think we should do the Savage race. Like that's where we started. That was like level 1 of the whole thing. And I was like, don't they do medals for spelling bees or something? Like there's got to be something else we could do. And she's like, I think we should do the Savage race. And I was like, Marie, and I don't know if you've met my wife. If you haven't yet, the words savage and race do not apply to her. Neither one of those things. She is the least competitive person I've ever met and the least savage person. So she told our kids, I think I want to do a thing called the Savage race. And they said, what does that mean? And she said, well, what's a savage, kids? And they were like, I don't know. And so she said to them, she said, well, a savage is like someone who's like unsophisticated. It's someone who's, rough around the edges. It's somebody who's unrefined, somebody who's like really like hardcore. Sometimes it can mean like you're really tough. And she goes, does that sound like me? And the kids both said, no, absolutely not. And she said, well, do you think I could do a Savage race? And they both said, no, we don't think so. And so we trained for a while. We tried to get ready for this thing. And then over the last month, our son, he got a concussion. And then he got ear infections. And then we were in the hospital with ear infections. And so most of our training over the last month turned into us eating a lot of pizza in a hotel room, which I don't know if you train for these things. It's not the best method. There's other methods out there, like working out and eating right and stuff. We didn't do that one. And so the last month has been a little bit of a mess, and I thought we're going to get to this thing and it's going to be a disaster, and but we're still going to do it because we paid like a ton of money to go crawl through mud that is not just mud, if you know what I mean. Like there's other things in that mud. And so yesterday we showed up with a lot of people from this room who also have bad ideas in their lives, and we decided to savage together. And so we were savaging. We were such savages. And we spent 7 miles on this course where you go through all these obstacles and you are supposed to run for 7 miles. We didn't necessarily run all of that. We found all the obstacles. We did all the obstacles. And guys, I do want to tell you, Marie was a savage, guys. She was a savage in a way that we had never seen before. She like climbed up things. She jumped off of things. She went through things. She crawled through that mud and manure on her hands. I couldn't, honestly, I went ahead of her. I was ahead with Ken, and I told Ken, I said, I will give you 100-to-1 odds that she will not do that. Fortunately, Ken did not take me up on it because she actually did it, and we would be broke now. So that was good, actually. But she did it. It was a lot of fun, and we got through it. But what was interesting is as the race was going, everybody started to get into kind of these clumps of groups of people. So Raul and Mike took off towards the front because they actually did do things, and they're inclined athletically, and so they just made us all look bad and feel worse. And so they went way ahead of us, and then Ken and another guy, Chris, and I kind of hung out in kind of the front or quadrant, I guess. Then we had another group kind of behind that and another group that was in the back. But it was interesting because nobody did it alone. Nobody went alone. And after we got done, we were talking about it. We were at a restaurant eating all the French fries that they had. And it was like a Ron Swanson moment where he's like, son, I think what you heard me say is I want a lot of eggs and sausage. I said, I want all of your eggs and sausage. It was kind of like that. Like, I think you heard me say I want a lot of French fries. We want all of your French fries. Just give them all to us. And so we sat down, we're eating French fries and talking about the race. And it was interesting because we were talking about how we would not want to do this alone. This is something that, for the most part, you want somebody else there. Like, have you ever done something like this and done it alone? It would be really weird, wouldn't it? Like, all by yourself. And I saw some people doing it. I felt bad for them. Like, this is an odd thing to do alone. Wouldn't you want somebody else to bear witness to that, to be a part of that? Like, I don't know if you've ever been to like a big moment, like a Disney or like things that you do for fun. And all of a sudden you're like, you see that one person by themselves with their selfie stick. You're like, oh, that doesn't seem fun. It'd be more fun to do this together. This would be better if we were together. And it's interesting because I think there's moments in our lives that we want somebody to bear witness to, right? Like there's moments that you want other people there to see what you're doing, to be a part of what you're doing, and for you to be a part of what they're doing. I mean, when I got done with the race, I literally couldn't help myself, and I saw other people doing the same thing. When I got done, I couldn't help myself but to walk back through the obstacles and find the rest of our group and watch them do what they were doing and cheer for them as they were doing what they were doing. Like, I just couldn't help it. And there's part of you that's just what we're wired to do and be in these tribes. And so for us, I think this is an important thing. I think like for us to learn how to be in a tribe is important. Jesus himself, he came to earth and he created a tribe. He got 12 guys together. Now, this isn't because Jesus was like bored. It wasn't because Jesus needed the moral support. That's not what Jesus needed. Jesus is God incarnate, yet he pulls together this tribe. There's just something in us as humans, in the human experience, where we need others to be around us. And so he pulls together this tribe of 12 guys. We talked about this a little bit last week, but through this series, what we're trying to do is just look at the moments that Jesus just pulls away with just his followers. Because I think there's really interesting things that happen. And this is one of the moments we're going to talk about today, is that he pulls away, not just with the 12, but actually with the 3. Remember, there's a 12. So we talked about this last week. I'm going to go through them again because it was fascinating. How I talked to people after last Sunday and how few of us actually knew who the disciples were and how often we've ever talked about the disciples. So remember, there's Peter and his brothers Andrew and Philip. And then there's James and John. Remember James, there's a James the Greater and a James the Lesser. The lesser James we don't know much about. The greater James, it's possible he wrote the book of James. We're not really sure. That could have been the brother of Jesus or this James who was a disciple. But James, that is not the same guy who is the brother of Jesus. Jesus did have a brother named James. He also had a brother named Jude. Apparently his parents had a thing for J names. So there was Jesus, and so he had all these guys, again, Peter, Andrew, Philip, James the Lesser, and John. Then he had Bartholomew. He had Simon the Zealot, who was the kind of the guy who was more the religious, kind of what we would call a right winger. He had Luke, who would have been the left winger, or Matthew, who would have been the left winger, who was the tax collector, which is really fascinating. Then under that, he would have had probably his last couple guys that he called in were Thaddeus and Thomas. Thaddeus also is called Nathaniel in other places. And then we had Thomas, and we have Judas the Iscariot. Now, at this moment, what we're going to see is we're going to see them all pulled together, and all the 12 are going to be collected, but then Jesus is going to send away 9 of them. It's a really weird moment. And he just calls together 3 of them. Just 3 of them come back in. And what he wants is he just wants Peter and James and John to be with him for this moment. It's very odd. He literally, it's like he hand selects them. Like he has the 12, but inside of those 12, his boys are Peter and James and John. Those are his people. They're the tightest with him. This week and next week, we're going to look at just the 2 moments where he just pulls away with Peter, James, and John only. It's very interesting why Jesus would choose to do that. But he pulls away with just these 3 guys. This week and next week, we'll look at that, and then we'll go back to looking at the 12 on the last Sunday of the series. But he pulls away with them, and he has this moment with them. And he has a couple really special moments with these guys. And these are his people. And so we're going to be in Matthew chapter 17. If you have a Bible or a phone, you're welcome to go there, or it'll be on the screens here. But in Matthew chapter 17, this moment, and I'm going to warn you real quick, this is one of the weirdest moments of all of Jesus' ministry. It's very confusing what's about to happen. And I'm going to try to make the best of it, but it is a weird moment that happens here. So in Matthew chapter 17 is where this starts. And this moment is recorded in Luke and it's recorded in Mark, both in chapter 9 of Luke and Mark. This is a really important moment. It's called the Transfiguration of Jesus. It's a really important moment. but it's recorded in all these other Gospels. Now it starts out, and what it says here is it says, after 6 days, Jesus took with him, again, Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Remember, those two are brothers. Now they're actually, Jesus calls them brothers. He also calls them the sons of thunder, which is a fun nickname for those two guys. We don't know why he calls it that. It sounds to me like they were like WWE wrestlers, like the sons of thunder kind of thing. I'm not sure that's what it was about. I don't know what it was for. Remember, these guys, James and John, were two of the youngest disciples. John was maybe 14 when he was following Jesus. My guess is if you ever hung out with like middle school, high school boys long enough, you know what the thunder is. And that's my guess, is that they had intestinal issues and they had gas a lot. So, that's my guess. That's not scientific. I'm just saying we don't know where else it came from. Maybe that's what it is. So he takes them and he leads them high up on a mountain by themselves. It's just Jesus and these three guys. That's all that's there. He takes them high up on this mountain. And when he gets up to the top of the mountain, then it says, there he was transfigured before them. Now, we don't see like a warning for this. Now, in some of the other accounts, we see maybe he was praying and then he was transfigured, but it's just like all of a sudden Jesus is transfigured. Transfigured, the word here is the word metamorpho in Greek, which is the same word that we actually saw when we did the whole renewal series. If you remember in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, it says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That word transformed there is the same word as transfiguration. Metamorpho is what transformed is in Romans 12:2. That's the same word that's being said here for the transfiguration. He is literally transformed. He is transformed from his current state of being into something else. This is, again, guys, this is a weird moment. Like if you're new to following Jesus, especially if you were like in Peter and James and John's shoes, and you're just following Jesus up a mountain, and then all of a sudden he is just transformed, it's a weird thing. We don't know if it was like an Optimus Prime type thing. We don't know what exactly the transformation may have gone like, if it was piece by piece or if it was all at once. We don't know how this whole thing worked out, but he was transformed in front of their eyes. And it says that he was transfigured before them. And it says the two things that we know about it is that his face shone like the sun. I wish we used the word shone more often, by the way, like that. I like that. Shone like the sun. It was shining like the sun. And his clothes became as white as the light. So what we know is happening here is that his face is shining. Now, this is something that is only seen of like heavenly beings or people who are without shame. What we see in Psalm 34, there's a verse that says, those who look to God are radiant. Their faces are radiant. They are never covered with shame. There's a psalm that says this in Psalm 34, that their faces are never covered with shame. They are radiant. That's what we're seeing is maybe they're trying to show us that this is a God, this is a man, this is Jesus whose face is not covered with shame, that his face is radiant. And suddenly his clothes start to glow, which is weird. And every time we see it in the Bible that clothes are glowing, like this word that we see here is that his clothes became white as the light, or they became glowing like this, what we know is that it's usually an angel. We see it with every angel in the Bible, that their clothes would be glowing. So he's kind of making this push towards Jesus has now kind of removed his heavenly layer and is starting to show this spirit within him. He's starting to show who he really is. The person behind the human mask is starting to come out. Now, I don't know about you, this is something that you would only do probably in front of people who you trust, right? If you're Jesus, I don't think you'd want to just show this inward being to just anybody. I don't know about you, but in your life, I'm going to guess there's very few people that you remove the human mask and you show them the inner soul in your life. I'm going to guess there's not a lot of people that you trust enough that you remove the human mask of who you are, because let's face it, it's probably not great what's underneath it. You're probably not super proud of it. Now, Jesus, it becomes more beautiful when he shows them who he is. It actually becomes more beautiful. And I believe that usually when you show people what's behind that human mask, that most people see it as more beautiful than what you thought it was. This is why I love like what happens in our small groups, the tribes we have in our church that meet every week in homes. This is why I think it's so important for you to be in something like that, is to have people around you. Maybe it's only 3 people like Jesus had that you trust enough that you can start to take off that human mask and show them this thing underneath it. And maybe they actually think it's better than you think it is. Maybe there's people that you trust that much, and Jesus trusts these guys with this inward transformation. He shows them who he is. So it says that he becomes white as the light, or his clothes become white as light. His face is shining. Now, after this, things are going to get a little weird. I know it's not weird yet, but it's going to get weird here in a second. And it says that just then appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. So if you're not familiar with the Bible, Moses and Elijah lived like way back here in the Bible. They were people who lived at least about 1,500 years before Jesus, up to about 2,000 years before Jesus. They had been dead for a long time. So this is like a Marley and Marley situation in A Christmas Story, the Muppet version. I've never seen the other versions. I'm not sure there are any other versions. But when Marley and Marley, the ghosts come back, that's what's happening right now. It's like that kind of thing. And Moses and Elijah appear before them just talking with Jesus. This would be concerning. This is a weird moment. These 2 guys who are dead are now in front of you, standing in front of you. Picture this from their point of view, talking with Jesus. Now, we don't know exactly why just these 2 characters. There's a lot of characters in the Old Testament. But we do know that there's a high probability that it's because Moses is a guy who himself, he was a guy who led thousands of people. He was a very well-known guy. But he also had an experience where his face was glowing. If you remember this in Exodus 34, there's a moment where his face, he goes up to the top of a mountaintop. And at the top of the mountain, he sees God, and his face starts glowing, just like what Jesus is experiencing. But notice there's a difference here. Moses' experience is glowing from outward reflection of God. Jesus is glowing from the inside out because God is within him. And he's glowing through his face to them, but they had a similar experience. Elijah shows up. He's also had many mountaintop experiences. Elijah, if you remember, he goes to the top of Mount Carmel. He has this showdown with the gods of Baal. And then after that, he has this moment where he leaves there and goes to Mount Horeb, and God speaks to him on a mountain in a small, still voice. He whispers to him. He has this mountaintop experience. Maybe that's why they're there. They're these pillars of faith. These are the big dogs. Like, these are the guys of the Old Testament, and they're standing in front of them. And what I love is the next moment. Because Peter and James and John are standing there. They're seeing this whole thing happen. And for some reason, Peter feels the need to speak up. Like, there's like, this is like the triad of like the most important people in maybe the entire Bible, all standing there. Peter would have known who they were from growing up and hearing their stories over and over again. And he sees Jesus talking to them. And for some reason, Peter's like, you know what, I should probably talk now. Probably time for me to jump in. They probably need me. Like, this is what he's like. Literally, nobody is asking him to speak. Nobody wants this. Peter always reminds me. I have an uncle, and his name's Carmel, and that's his real name. His name is Carmel, and Carmel is a pastor, and he's not a good one. He's a guy. He tries his best, but good. Oh, bless his heart. And he's mostly been interim for different churches at different times, and it's better that way. But Carmel is a very sweet man, just a disaster in other ways. And Carmel, at one point, he decided that nobody was asking for it. Nobody wanted him to do this. But for some reason, he decided he needed to write a manual on different things about the Bible, different philosophies and doctrine. And so one day, I remember we were sitting at a Cracker Barrel, because this is in Ohio, and there's only Cracker Barrels in Ohio. They don't have any other restaurants. There's just Cracker Barrels everywhere. We're sitting at a Cracker Barrel in Ohio, and my grandfather's talking to Carmel, and they're having this conversation. I just overhear it. And Carmel says, you know what, Gerald, I've been writing some doctrine. I've been writing some pamphlets. I'm going to pass them out. And my grandpa said, did anybody ask you to do that? He goes, nope. Just felt like I needed to. And my grandpa said, well, what are the pamphlets on? And Carmel goes, well, it's on speaking in spiritual tongues. thought everybody needed to know about speaking in spiritual tongues. And my grandfather said, so what did you write about? Well, he goes, well, I just wrote about how to do it right and how to do it wrong. There's different ways to do it, And my grandpa said, well, that sounds good. Did anybody take them? And he said, well, no, not yet, because I had a misprint on them, so I had to reprint them. And my grandfather said, what was the misprint? And he goes, well, I spelled the word tongues wrong the whole way through it. And my grandfather said, well, that's too bad. You had to get them all reprinted. He goes, yeah, can you believe it? I spelled tongues Tongs. That's tongs, in case you don't know. And my grandpa said, well, it's a good thing you caught it. He goes, well, I didn't catch it. His wife, Ruth. He said, Ruth caught it. I didn't catch it. She spelled it right. She fixed it for me. So now it's in there right. Tongues, Thongs. Friends, I kid you not. There were 5,000 pamphlets printed about speaking in your spiritual thongs. If you've ever seen my Uncle Carmel, you don't want to see him speak in a spiritual thong. I wish that was a joke. He's in my family, guys. He's not a blood relative he married in. We do always try to quantify that. You know the one. You've got him too. But seriously. Nobody asked for it. Nobody wanted it. And for him to speak up and do something just made it worse. And Peter's in this spot where he's like, oh, I see you guys having this conversation, all of you really important people. And you know what I should do? Nobody's asking for it, but I should probably speak up now. It's probably time for me to talk. And so Peter just throws in this interjection. Again, can you imagine like the huddle of Jesus and Moses and Elijah, and they're having this little conversation. Then Peter, who's like a 16-year-old, maybe 18-year-old guy, is like tapping his way, and he's like, hey guys, I got something to say too. You probably need some input. Okay, here's what I got to say. And then he gets in there, and what he says is, Peter says to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. Thanks, Peter. Your commentary is great. And then he says, if you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. So do you see what Peter's doing right here? Is he's like, so I see what's going on. We got Moses, who's this guy who led literally millions of people out of Egypt into the desert. He led them towards the promised land. We've got this other guy, Elijah, who calls down fire from heaven onto this altar and destroys all the prophets of this God named Baal. We've got Jesus, who's performing miracles upon miracles upon miracles. And he's like, I know that's all well and good, but guys, guess what? I can make tents. So that's good too, right? See? I can do stuff too. I have no idea why Peter speaks up. Like, this is just a bad idea. And now, I don't know if you've ever been interrupted in your life. I don't know if you've ever had this moment, like with me. I've had these moments where my kids interrupt all the time. I don't know if you have kids. You don't get to have conversations anymore. There's just interruptions upon interruptions upon interruptions, and they have like updates they need to tell you, and questions they need to ask you, and concussions that they're getting, and infections or whatever. They just interrupt life like a lot, And so you have these interruptions. I don't know if you've ever had this before. In this moment, God is about to give the holiest interruption that has ever happened in the entire Bible. Because as soon as Peter is speaking, it says this in verse 5. While he was still speaking, he's still in the mid-sentence. It says, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. This is God saying politely, Peter, shut up. Like, he literally interrupts Peter mid-sentence and says, don't listen to him. Listen to Jesus. Like, it's a fascinating moment. And in this moment, it says that I love it that he doesn't just send like the words, he sends like a cloud over him to like confuse him. It's like if my son was just at the dinner table just chatting it up, and I just took like a blanket and threw it over him. He's like, what's happening? Not that I've done it or yet. And he sends this cloud down, and then he says these words, this is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Now, just so you know, in the New Testament, there's only 2 times that God ever speaks publicly. God doesn't speak to groups of people at a time very frequently. More than one person doesn't normally hear God at the same time, right? God speaks to individuals, but he doesn't really speak to groups at a time. In this moment, God is speaking to a group, and the only other time he does this, the only other time that God speaks to a group of people is at the baptism of Jesus. And guess what God says there? He says the same exact thing. He says the exact same words when Jesus is lowered down into the water and he comes back up. It's a beautiful moment, by the way, because again, this is the only time that we see the Trinity all in one location. We know that happens all the time, but the Trinity in that moment is visibly audibly noticeable in one spot. We see that Jesus is in the water. We see that God speaks from heaven and the Holy Spirit comes down like a dove. All three parts of the Trinity are there at this moment. And when God speaks one line, this same thing, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." That exact same line happens at the baptism. The only time God speaks to more than one person at a time, he says the same thing. It must be important. And he gives this public affirmation to Jesus. He's saying, "This is my Son. This is who I love. I'm pleased with what he's doing. I'm proud of him." I don't know how you feel about affirmation, especially public affirmation. I like it personally. I like being affirmed, and I like it publicly, if possible. Like for instance, thank you. If after this service, we were standing back there and you came up and you were like, "Hey, Kevin, you're a great speaker," I would say, "Thank you." Or for instance, just for instance, if you came up to me after service and you said, "Kevin, you look great today. Have you been working out?" I would say, "No, but I did do the Savage Race." But no, I have not been working out. Or for instance, I'm just saying for instance, these are options you could choose from. If you came up to me after service and you said, "Kevin, you're so humble," I would say, "I know." I mean, it feels good to be publicly affirmed, right? And Jesus in this moment is being publicly affirmed. He's being spoken to from God himself saying, "This is my Son." I mean, I don't know if you've ever had that moment. Like when I was growing up, I didn't realize my family, we were not people who said like we were proud of each other. We weren't like publicly affirming people. My family was just not wired that way. I don't know how your family works. My wife's family, they're the opposite. Like everything's the best and we're the best at everything. Like they literally one time told me I did a great job finishing my ice cream. That's what they told me one time. That's how affirming they are. And I was like, "Thank you for noticing," because I've been finishing my ice cream for years. Nobody said a word. But like my family, we weren't those people. Like we weren't super publicly affirming. We were kind of chill about those things. We didn't really get into that. And I remember when it was my wedding day, and my brother was my best man. And after the ceremony, he came up to me and just gave me a big hug. He's a large man, and so it's going to be a big hug. And he gave me this big hug, and he just said in my ear, he said, "Kevin, I'm proud of you." And it hit me hard. Like I don't know the last time I heard that. I don't know the last time I thought that. In this moment, Jesus is being told by his Father publicly that he is proud of his Son. He's pleased with what he's doing. That he's proud of his Son. And friends, here's the good news. Just real quick, if I can sidebar. You and I have been grafted in. We learn this. That because of Jesus, we are now sons and daughters of God. We are joint heirs. We are brothers and sisters under Jesus. That means, by the transitive property of that there is a God who is proud of you. I don't know how often you've thought that. I think most of us think that God is mostly angry with us, mostly disappointed with us. If you don't hear anything else, maybe that's what you need to hear today, is that there's a God who's actually proud of you. But he speaks here and he says, "This is my Son. I love him, and I'm pleased with what he's doing." And God, from this point on, from when he says this the first time, what we know is that God is pleased to have his fullness dwell within Jesus. He's pleased to have his entire being be represented by Jesus. He's saying, if you want to know how I would act as God, watch how Jesus acts. If you want to know how I would respond to things, watch how Jesus responds to things. If you want to have a relationship with me, have a relationship with him. I'm pleased to have my fullness dwell in Jesus. And as soon as this moment ends, it says to listen to him, right? That's the last thing it says. This is my son whom I love, who I'm well pleased with. Listen to him. God is so pleased with Jesus that he says we should listen to him. And I know that sounds like such a simple command, but friends, how bad are we at this? How much in these moments, just like Peter, do we want to speak up? Do we want to tell Jesus what's on our mind or give him a piece of our mind instead of just listening to him? We get this flipped all the time. And we want to speak up. We want to have the words to say we're the ones who think that we have so much to share. And what we're not doing is we're not listening to him. I don't know how your prayer life works. I don't know how you speak to God. I know that a lot of us, we throw up these like Hail Mary prayers at the moments where we need it the most, and we just get like overwhelmed. We just throw those up, and then we're like, hey, God, take care of this, and we give him the laundry list. But how much time have you spent not just giving God the laundry list, but listening to what he says back? I had to learn at one point that that's what meditation actually is the meditation is the listening response to prayer. Prayer is the speaking, and meditation is the listening. And so many times I think we want to be in charge, we want to be in control, we want to be the one speaking. And he's saying, no. Your job is not to speak. Your job is to listen. Listen to him. And the next thing we see is we see the disciples. We see Peter and James and John laying on the ground, face down, and they've been terrified. It says they fell face down. And you know at this moment that like James and John are looking at Peter like, why did you say something? Why would you do that? You know? Like, idiot. You made us look bad in front of Moses and Elijah. You know? And you know even Moses was like, who is this guy? You know? And Jesus is like, it's a long story. I just do what the Father tells me to do. You know, it's like, this moment's happening between all of them, this awkward, like, why is Peter here moment. And it says that they were face down and they were terrified. God terrifies them. And notice that what's interesting is it says that we should listen to Jesus in this moment. You would think that Jesus would say something really profound. You would think that, like, okay, so we just heard from God, his own voice saying, listen to Jesus. What's the thing that we need to hear? What's the big thing? You would think Jesus would give us like this big one-liner. And instead of saying anything, what Jesus does next is he comes up to the terrified and he touches them. He doesn't even speak. He touches them. These are terrified people, and he touches them. And he says, get up. And then his next phrase is, do not be afraid. What he wants us to hear in that moment is maybe the first line he says after that is, do not be afraid. And it says, when they looked up, they saw no one but Jesus. They saw no one but Jesus. Now here's the question we've got to ask. Okay, this is very weird. In this story, we've identified why Jesus is there. Jesus is going to be transfigured. He's going to show who he is. We've identified why Moses and Elijah show up. It may not even just be that they were there because they represented these different moments in the Old Testament. It also could be that Moses represents the law because he wrote the law of the Old Testament. That's what his job was. He wrote the law. And that Elijah represents all the prophets. And we see that Jesus is coming to fulfill all the law and the prophets. Maybe that's why they're there. We understand why they're there. We understand why Jesus is there. The question is, why are Peter and James and John even there? They're not there to build tents. They're not there to speak up. What are they there for? What's their job? Why are they there? Why are they around? It's very confusing, isn't it? Why did Jesus even bring them? Maybe it's for this moment where they look up and they see no one but Jesus. See, here's the thing that I think we have to learn sometimes is, and I know this is really weird, but I think the reason they're there is to be witnesses to the power of Jesus. They're there just to be witnesses to the power of Jesus. They're there just to show up. I think we have this inverse relationship with Jesus sometimes, where we think like we're such a great get for Jesus. Like he's so lucky to have me and all my talents and all my abilities. And what I can do is tell him what I can do for him. Like I can kind of bargain with him and show him how good I am at the things I do. Where what I need to be devoting my life to is not boasting about what I can do, but boasting about who he is. That's what witnesses look like. It's not talking about what I can do, but talking about who he is. That's what we're supposed to be there for. That's what they're there for. I had a friend who in high school, we went to high school together. He was a few years younger than me, and he was one of my best friends. We grew up together. We spent most of our lives together. His name was Brett. And Brett was he's a good kid. He played football with us. He was a very talented football player. At a young age, he was in ninth grade and just really talented football player, had a huge potential and big things ahead of him. He was a big kid. He was strong. He was very athletic. And there was a real chance of him playing some serious football down the road. And he was a really talented kid. But there came a night where he went home one night and after football practice, and he told his mom, like, my leg hurts really bad. Like, it hurts really bad. And Brett was not a kid to complain. He didn't complain about things. And he was like, my leg hurts real bad. I don't know what's going on. And the next day he went to school, went to football practice. He could barely move. And from that point on, it got worse and worse and worse. And his mother was a nurse. She took him to the hospital finally after he was in so much pain, and they did an x-ray. And what they found was that he had a massive tumor full of cancer growing on his femur. And it was so bad that and it was high enough, they weren't sure if they could keep the leg. They weren't sure if they would have to do, what kind of chemo he would go through. And so they told him, they said, Brett, we think that you may have to, like, you're not going to play football this year. You're not going to be doing the things you want to do, but we need to send you to Boston. We need to fly you to Boston to get to a center there where they can look at this a little bit more in depth and tell you what you need to do and what your treatment plans are going to be. And hopefully we can salvage your leg. Hopefully we can get you on the right treatment plans, but we're not sure yet. And so the night before Brett left for Boston, we had a little prayer service at our church. Just a few of us got together. And we put Brett in the middle of our circle, and we anointed him with oil, and we prayed over him. I just remember praying for him. It was nothing spectacular. It was just praying for him. But that night after he left, he told his mom, he said, my leg doesn't hurt anymore. So the next morning, we took them to the airport. I remember seeing them off in the airport. And we put them on the plane, and they went to Boston. They got in that night, went to their hotel room, and if you've been in spots like this, you know that you just don't talk a lot. There's not a lot to talk about. And so they had kind of a silent drive to the hotel. They got to the hotel. It was pretty quiet. The next morning, they woke up, and they went to the hospital, met with the doctor. The doctor sat him down and said, here's the treatment plans we're looking at. We're trying to salvage the leg. Here's the things we need to do. But we need to take a whole other set of x-rays and MRIs here to double check everything. And they said, you guys might want to go to lunch. And when you come back from lunch, we're going to go through all the options and talk about what your life's going to look like from here on out. And so they went to lunch, and they just kind of scraped their food around their plate. Nobody really ate anything. When they came back to the hospital after that, the doctor sat him down, and he said, I don't know how to tell you this, but on the scans we did this morning, there's no cancer. It's gone. There's nothing there. And we don't know what happened. Now, we knew what happened. They didn't know what happened. So we don't know what to do with that. And so the next day they did a whole other set of scans and a whole other set of x-rays and said, there's nothing there. You guys can just go home. I remember seeing Brett when he got off the plane. And the thing that I thought at the time was, I was like, oh, great, now Brett can get back to football and the things he was going to do. Now, here's the question. Do you think that Jesus healed him from that so that Brett could play football? I think Jesus healed Brett from that so that Brett would spend the rest of his life as a witness to the power of Jesus Christ. Sometimes we want to sell ourselves short on talking about what we can do and look at the things we can do. Whether it's we want to play football or we want to build tents or we want to build a business or we want to have fame or notoriety or money or whatever the thing is, that's what we start to get focused on. And above all, Jesus does not call us to any of those things. Jesus calls us to be witnesses to his power. In Acts chapter 1, verse 8, the final commandment that Jesus gives his followers before he leaves the earth As he uses that word, he says, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria to the ends of the earth. You will be my witnesses. He does not call us to be anything more or anything less than witnesses to the power of Jesus Christ. I wonder the things that we're chasing after that really don't matter. I wonder about the things that we're pursuing that really aren't worth pursuing. I wonder what things we put in front of being witnesses to the power of Jesus Christ. What are the things that we put in front of that we think are more important? What are the things we think, oh, no, Jesus, but you don't understand it. I can build tents real good. That's what I'm really good at. And Jesus going, yeah, that's fine. Good for you. But listen, I'm here, and there's a Father who's proud and pleased with what I'm doing, and he's put all of his fullness in me. And he's saying, maybe if you just listen to what I'm doing instead of telling me what you can do. Maybe if you're a witness to what I am doing and you're telling other people about that and you're expressing that through the way you live, those other things will fall in place. The business, the family, the things you want on top of that, they will fall in place if you're living your life as a witness to the power of Jesus Christ. And so today, I don't know what that looks like in your life. I don't know the things you're pursuing or the things that you're proud of, the things that you think, like, this is the most important thing in my life right now. But I would challenge, and I would ask you to think about, what does that look like in light of being a witness to the power of Jesus Christ? What would that look like if we were all doing that? Again, the story is very confusing to me, and next week we'll go into some that make more sense to me. But that's the only reason Jesus brings them with him. And to these guys, to the end of their lives, Peter and James and John will spend the rest of their lives dedicated and sold out to that mission above all others, to being witnesses to the power of Jesus Christ. In your life, you may have a story that you've forgotten about. You may have things that you've had happen, because I guarantee you're in this room because at some point Jesus interceded for you. You're in this room because at some point Jesus came through for you. You're in this room because at some point something was going one way and Jesus turned it around and made it go the other way. I guarantee that's happened for every single one of us. The question is, what are we doing with that story? How are we being witnesses to that power of Jesus Christ? So I want to challenge you to think about that this week. I want to ask you to stand, and I want to pray for you as we go through our weeks together, experiencing that. If you're not in a group yet, I would also encourage you to get into a small group. Talk to Janessa after service and get to a small group where you can have that tribe, that community, holding each other accountable, having these conversations, knowing one another really well. Talk to Janessa about that. We'd love to get you into a group. But right now I want to pray for us as we go through this week that we would look like witnesses of Jesus Christ, and we're going to sing together before we leave. Let's pray. Jesus, I thank you for today. I thank you for this time where we can be together. I thank you for your word. And for this really confusing story that doesn't always make sense, and it has so many layers and so many avenues to it. But we thank you that at the end of the day, we understand that we're in the same shoes, in the same spot as Peter, as James, as John. That we've seen your power. We've seen your purpose. We've seen what you can do. And maybe instead of telling you what we can do, we should be listening to what you're calling us to do. We should be listening to what you're calling us to be, how you're calling us to act. Maybe we should be listening to your words first and not putting ours first. So this week, God, I pray that you would use us in our conversations. Pray to use us in the way we act, just in the way we speak, in the way we think, in the way that we move through this world, that you would use us to look like people who are following you, who are witnesses to your power. I pray that you would use us just to intervene in certain situations or have conversations with certain people or just act as though we're witnesses to what you've done in our lives. That we wouldn't forget those things or move them aside, but we would remember the things you've done for us. At the end of the day, we would go to those around us and show them the power that you have, show them the love you have, show them the grace you have in the way that you've shown it to us. So we thank you for who you are. We thank you for what you've done. We pray that we would be people who tell others about who you are and what you've done. I pray these things in your name. In Jesus' name, amen.